This is the Kit Adam 0110B, a function row-less full-size LEGO keyboard, and in this video I'm going to show you the left-hand integrated numpad build. I'll also show you how I prepared and modded the keyboard to achieve this typing sound. See my Linktree link in the description below where you'll find my affiliate link for the KBDCraft store website, or use discount code KEYFACE for 5% off. We're getting straight into it on this one as there's a lot to cover. This is the full kit, which includes the full Kit Adam, which is the keyboard, the full Kit Adams, which is the numpad, and the merging kit. So there is a lot in the box. That means in the box you get the Lego for both cases, the PCBs for both kits, the plates for both kits, the stabilizers for both kits, dampening for both kits, the switches and keycaps for both kits, all the gaskets and feet you need for the build, and the merging kit needed for an integrated build. You can build the keyboard and numpad completely separate, you can connect them but keep them modular by doing the 0110A build, or integrate them as I'm going to do with the 0110B build. The merging kit is needed for doing an integrated build with the Adam keyboard kit and the Adams numpad kit. Moving straight into the build, the first job is to prepare and assemble the plate and PCB assemblies. I sorted the stabilizers first as they need a decent lube job to get rid of the rattle, which I know from previous Adam builds. With the keyboard stabilizers, I just lubed the stems and housings with Krytox 205 grade 0 and lubed the wires with dielectric grease. They don't need additional mods, just the lube. The numpad stabilizers are slightly different and need 2 of the legs clipping on the stems to make sure you get a nice clean bottom out on the keystroke. Once clipped, they get the same treatment as the keyboard stabilizers. Having built this keyboard a few times now, I'm keen to do the PE foam mod on this one as there isn't a switch sheet included. The PE foam mod is where you cut thin packing foam into a sheet to cover the top of the PCB so as the switches land off on the sheet instead of directly on the PCB. It gives a nice sound profile in plastic keyboards. Once the sheet is cut to size, I used a few switches to hold it in place on the PCB so as I could mark it up for cutting under the stabilizers. You need to cut out under the stabilizer housings so as you don't get a horrible foamy bottom out on the stabs. I obviously need to repeat this process for the numpad. Next, it's assembly of the 2 plate and PCB assemblies. The PE foam sits on the PCB, then the plate foam, then the plate on top. Install the corner switches to sandwich it all together and line everything up. Next, I installed the stabilizers, but you can install them at any point as long as the switches for those keys are left out. With the stabilizers in, I could install the rest of the switches. It's best to do this on a foam mat of some kind so you don't damage the PCB. And that's the keyboard plate and PCB assembly together, so we just have to do the same thing with the numpad, and that's both ready for later in the build. Next, it's case assembly, and I won't lie, I had some issues because I'm incapable of following LEGO instructions. That said, the instructions I followed made things a little confusing as the base layout changed partway through the build instructions and I started to improvise to avoid too many joins lining up through the layers. My main tip for the build is to follow the instructions to the letter, unless you reach an impasse and have to improvise like I did. As shown in the instructions, you build up from the base. Definitely don't install the feet first as you'll warp the base, which happened to me on my last build, and keep an eye on how straight the base stays throughout. In the instructions KBDCraft store sent to me as a PDF, it had duplicate steps for the left-hand numpad configuration as you run through the steps if you try this configuration. When it came time to put the plate and PCB assemblies on the gaskets, I had a lot of trouble lining things up. The tabs on the plate didn't line up great with the Lego, and the 2 plates don't marry up together very well at all on mine, which may be a left-hand configuration specific issue. They're really tight up against one another, and I'll likely trim one of the plates to loosen things up at a later date. I got all the way to the end of the build, even put the feet on, and I realised that I forgot to install the wire connecting the 2 PCBs together. This is why I said follow the instructions to the letter, so it was off with some of the Lego to get at the plate and PCB, wire in, case back together, and this is where I ran into problems with warping. When I installed the curved bricks on the top, it started to warp on me. I think because I'd installed the feet thinking I was done, which I left on while rebuilding this second time. I spent a long time taking apart the top layers, which flattened the base back out, checking the pieces were flat, then reinstalling them, but it kept ending up warped. I removed the feet again to get it perfectly flat against the desk and redid the process, but still warped it. In the end up, I had to reconfigure the case with some other Lego pieces to create a relief. By lining up a single Lego join from the top of the case to as close to the bottom as possible, you create a relief which allows the case to sit flatter. This seemed to work to some degree, and I did it only using Lego which came in the box. Finally, it's on with the keycaps and we're ready to try it out. To get the keyboard to work in the integrated configuration with the two PCBs connected, you have to install the correct firmware in both PCBs. Go to the open source page on the KBDCraft Store website and download this file, adam0110.uf2. To install on the keyboard PCB, hold down the escape key and plug in the keyboard, which will bring up this window. Release the escape key and drag and drop the firmware file from your download folder into the keyboard folder. Leave it plugged in a few seconds to sort itself out. To install on the numpad, unplug the USB-C cable from the keyboard, hold down the numlock key on the numpad and plug in the numpad, which will bring up the same window. Release the numlock key and drag and drop the same firmware file from your download folder into your keyboard folder. The whole keyboard should light up at this point, indicating it's all connected as it should be. Now let's hear how it sounds with the all-important typing test. And there we have it. Next, I'll run through the good and bad bits with this keyboard from a keyboard enthusiast perspective, but I remain crazy impressed by the typing sound and feel. It takes me a long time to get used to the layout and for my typing speed to increase with the Adam for some reason, but when I do get used to it, I really enjoy the typing sound and feel. The combination of the Lego case, switches and keycaps is an absolute cheat code in creating this gorgeous sound profile, and the PE foam mod definitely brought it home for me, as this is the nicest sounding Adam I've built yet. Now let's quickly go through some of the negatives I have on this one. First is the warping. I've had this issue on two Adam keyboards now, but I get the feeling it's due to my inability to read and follow Lego instructions, leading to me having to take it apart a bunch of times. That said, it does seem kind of easy to warp it, and I think a proper thick Lego bottom plate or more bricks and less plates in the build would probably fix this. Maybe even using genuine Lego for the build would help. Next is the plates being tight up against one another in this integrated build and it being difficult to line up. I'm not sure if this is only an issue with the left-handed build, but they are way too tight against each other. The next thing I mentioned in my last video, which is that the keyboard is still too flat to the desk. I'd like to see a more positive typing angle with the build, or perhaps some angle adjusting feet. The next thing I don't like is the layout of the numpad. The spacing of the columns of keys isn't even. There is a normal gap between column 1 and 2, then a much larger gap between column 2 and 3. It should be tidier than this for me. I would prefer to see the numpad with the correct spacing, with the difference taken up by the gap between the numpad and the main keyboard. You have to remember that they are restricted dimensionally by the size of the Lego. I just think there's a tidier way to do the numpad. Setting aside those few things, I'm still a huge fan of KBDCraft Store and their keyboards. The prices are really reasonable for what you get, they are great fun to build, and you end up with a really nice typing keyboard. It's not some gimmicky Lego keyboard that's unusable, but a really nice and inexpensive mechanical keyboard that happens to be made from Lego. The function rowless full-size layout is really useful and very popular right now, and being able to build with a left-hand numpad means that you can have an integrated numpad but keep your mouse closer to where it's needed than compared to a right-handed numpad. I still need to make the time to buy a Core 64 only, which is the plate and PCB assembly, and do my own Lego build around it, which would be really fun, but I remain very impressed by these keyboards, and I can't recommend them highly enough. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.